Yeah, I'm Dr. Larry Crumpler. I'm at the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science, and I'm a member of the Mars Perseverance rover science team.
Thank you. That sounds very interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Mars exploration?
Yeah, so it's a long-term goal of NASA's programs is to understand the geologic history of Mars, and to do that, as we know here in New Mexico, in order to understand the past history of an area, you have to look at the rocks. And so that's what we've been doing with rovers over the past couple of decades now. Is going, we're always talking about, looking at rocks, and, imaging rocks and things like that. And people kind of get a little confused. And the reason we do that, of course, is the same reason you do it when you walk out in the field here in somewhere in the Southwest and you hammer on a rock and you try to understand how that rock formed and where it formed and what sort of environment, that sort of thing. So that's basically what we're doing. We're just doing field geology on Mars.
So, I've seen a lot about the Mars exploration in the news. What exactly has happened within the past few months and over the last year?
Well, I can share with you a short presentation about what we've been doing if you would like to do that.
Yeah, sounds good.
I'm going to show a short presentation here about the Mars rover mission that's currently happening on Mars. It's called Perseverance. I'm a member of the Perseverance science team, and I'm responsible for a thing called in situ geologic mapping. That's basically just doing field geology using the rover on Mars. So I'm going to show you a few slides just to remind us all what we've been doing for the past 60 days or so on Mars after landing in February 18th of this year. And the main thing has been we've been preparing for a thing that happened on Monday. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So just to remind you, here's a picture of the rover itself. And you can kind of think of it as sort of an upgraded version of the Curiosity rover, which you're probably familiar with from the past several years. It's about the size of a small car. It weighs about 2,000 pounds, so it's quite a package to deliver to the surface of Mars. And it has a whole bunch of instruments, many of which you can consider sort of as being an upgraded version of some of the instruments that were on Curiosity, and some entirely new instruments as well. Of course, we have a camera on top of that tall mast that sticks up that takes all these beautiful color pictures, stereo. We now have the capability of doing telephoto images, and we've been making heavy use of that. We have another instrument called SuperCam, which is able to, it's the one that does the laser zapping rocks. And we do that, in order to kind of get a sense of the composition of rocks by just standing off and shooting at them. So that's kind of a field geologist's dream tool. And of course, that instrument is built by some people up at Los Alamos National Labs here in Mexico. And then we have and it's basically an instrument that's basically a weather station. It's called a MEDA. And of course, that measures temperatures and pressures and things like that. On the underside of the river, there's a thing called RIMFAX, which is a ground penetrating radar. We use that a lot here on the Earth for, like, looking for under buried pipes and things like that. You can actually use it to do geologic studies. So we're using it as we drive along. We're kind of looking into the ground, trying to understand, the various layers and density variations in the subsurface. And then we have another instrument, well, a series of instruments on the end of the arm that looks like a giant club sticking out to the right there. That's the would be the instrument Sherlock and the associated camera, which is a microscopic imager. You put that up against rocks and you can measure all sorts of things about the composition, including the presence or absence of organic compounds and things like that. Of course, that's an important part of this mission. So it's one of the goals of the mission is to look for evidence of past life. Then we have an instrument called Pixel, which can measure the actual composition of the rocks. And then there's a couple of technology demonstrations. One's called Moxie. That's That's one where we'll try to make oxygen out of the carbon dioxide Martian atmosphere. And it's an experiment that we want to work with to see if we can use this process in future exploration of Mars. Obviously, astronauts go to Mars, they'll need sources of all sorts of resources for things from air to breathe to rocket fuel, and so making oxygen out of the Martian atmosphere would be a very useful thing. And then, of course, we have the small helicopter, which is really a technology demonstration. It's not a science instrument, and it's of course has its own name. It's called Ingenuity, and we flew that just yesterday, Monday morning, as of this presentation. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So here's the goals of the mission. Basically, it's to study the rocks and landscape and understand the geologic history of the area. And a big goal is to look for signs of ancient life. All previous missions, we've looked for signs of the sort of environments that could support life, whether it was how long water was on the surface, and so on and so forth. In this one, we're actually looking for the signs of life, and that means sort of it's a giant fossil collecting trip, if you will. Except in this case, we're not expecting to find bones and seashells and things, but one thing you might expect on Mars, if it indeed had life at all, would be small microbes that were existing in some of the aqueous environments that were on the surface, some of the lakes and rivers and things like that. They would be trapped in the sediments, and so we're going to a place that might have a lot of sediments that were associated with water, and they have basically collected some of the organic materials associated with these microbes, and we can find that, and so on and so forth. The other idea, of course, is to prepare for humans, so we're doing these technology tests. But a really big goal is what's called sample caching. We're collecting small samples of Martian rock as we drive along, and we're storing them for later return to Earth by another mission, probably at the end of the decade. So that's a really big part of the mission. And the way that works is with this slide, it's basically sample return. And it would probably happen somewhere in the late 2020s to early 2031. As the rover drives along on the surface, it collects cores of particularly interesting rocks and outcrops, and deposits those on the surface. And they're sealed, perfectly stable in the Martian environment. And then we'll send a retrieval rover later in the decade that will collect these, then return them to some sort of ascent vehicle, send it back to orbit where it rendezvous with an Earth return vehicle, and of course then they return to Earth, and we'll have it's documented Mars samples, so we know where they came from and the environment they were present in, and so that'll really be a big step in understanding the past history of Mars. You can see how big it is. It's basically just kind of a large tube, a hand-sized tube. We'll be collecting, we can actually collect about 38 samples. We'll probably collect batches of them and leave them in places on the surface, and then go and collect those later. My role on the mission is to do basically field geology. That is, as a geologist walks along and he maps the terrain on either side, and you've probably seen geologic maps that are kind of like topographic maps, or maps that you might use for following a trail in the field, in the mountains, and you basically identify rocks and then locate the contact or the line between different types of rocks, and try to determine something about the characteristics, and then you map it out by identifying a series of different colors and things like that. So you end up with a map of the different types of rocks around you, and the history and the sequence and so on. So that's kind of field geology in a nutshell. So So what I'll do is, as the rover's driving along, you can see out to a certain distance on either side, and we're actually sampling and touching and analyzing the rocks at the rover. And it's basically what you do when you're out in the field here as a field geologist. And so it's easy to then turn that into a geologic map. So it's one of the first field geologic maps done on another planet. So it's been a lot of fun so far, and we'll see what happens at the end. But by the end of the mission, the map will be this noodle that's maybe 40 meters wide and who knows, 20 kilometers long. So a little bit about the mission then. So here's a map of the northern part of Mars from the equator up to the pole on one hemisphere. And the yellow dot shows where we sent Perseverance to a place on the northwest edge of a big area called Isidis Phoenicia. And we'll talk a little about why we went there. There are a couple of other dots over there on the right, the white dots. So where the two previous rovers and landers landed. Down there on the bottom is where the Curiosity rover landed some back in 2014. And above that is where the lander that is currently studying Mars quakes is located. That landed in 2018. And then, of course, China is sending a lander and rover that will hopefully land on Mars. It's already in orbit, and the last heard that the landing was planned for something like late this spring. So we'll see how that goes. So anyway, that's where we are, and just to zoom in a little bit on what the actual physical terrain looks like. So the idea of this mission was we were landing inside this crater that was formerly filled by water. We can tell that it used to be a lake. And into this lake was a river coming from the left. And the river deposited a delta. A delta, of course, is where when a river carrying a lot of sediment enters a large body of water, the sediments get dumped. And so it kind of spreads out across the mouth of the channel where it enters the lake, and builds up into this broad shape. And almost all of the large rivers here on the Earth, of course, have deltas at their mouths where they enter the ocean or enter lakes and things. And they're beautiful places for preserving all sorts of things, because it's a very fine, silty sort of sediment that can retain all sorts of interesting records of what was going on, what the water was deposited. And in particular, that's a place where we find a lot of fossils here on the Earth. So this was the primary goal then of the mission, was to go and look at this river delta. It's also a beautiful terrain, because a lot of the beautiful southwestern landscapes that we all landed. Of course, the scale bar down the bottom. So we were about a mile away from the edge of the delta, and that's just where the lander selected to land, because it's just looked a little bit safer. So anyway, that's where we ended up. And one of the big goals of the mission, of course, has been doing this helicopter test. I mean, that's what we spent all of our time over the past 60 days or so. After we landed on the surface, we did a lot of driving around to kind of set that whole experiment up. In this picture, you're kind of looking at kind of the end result of all of that. We finally got the small helicopter Ingenuity deposited on the surface, and we just drove a short distance and did a selfie, kind of a family portrait of both the rover and the helicopter on the ground. And in the background, by the way, you can make out the kind of the cliffs of the delta. So we're kind of looking to the north here. And that big white patch, just above the helicopter in the background, is the area that was scoured by the rockets during the landing process. Okay. So since landing, so this is a view from the orbit, from one of our orbiting satellite image of the high-resolution camera that takes a lot of these images you see from time to time that look like air photos. And this is kind of looking down on that area. So it's the circle there is where we landed, the yellow circle. And we drove over to the right and did to a place basically where we could drop off the hardware associated with covering the helicopter, and then kind of drove back. And then right here where the little green dot is, we dropped the helicopter. And we've identified an area we call the helicopter airfield. It'll do all of its activities within that region. Then when we got through, we drove over there, and this was happening over the past week or so. We drove all the way over here, about 100 and 200 feet away to the place where we're sitting today. And this is where we have been sitting while observing the activities there with the helicopter. So the helicopter test itself is going to take place over the next 30 days or so. The first activity was to do a short hop, just go up and then come back down, and that's what happened on Monday. And then in a couple of days, we'll do the next one, which is to basically go up a little bit higher than we did on Monday, fly over to the side, and then so just sort of gradually increasing the complexity of what we do, just to prove out all the systems. And then once we're confident with that, then we will do fly out, maybe several tens of meters, fly out along our airfield there, and then come back and land. And maybe then beyond that, we'll do something more exotic, like flying out and landing somewhere else. But during all of this, we'll be taking images with the helicopter, looking down the ground, sort of testing the idea that we can use helicopters in the future on Mars to explore the surface of Mars beyond where you can actually drive or walk. So this was just an image from Monday morning. This was the rover sitting on the ground there all by itself. There's the rim of the crater we landed in is the mountains in the background. The actual delta is this little area over here on the right, kind of hidden behind this ridge. Here's the helicopter airfield, and there's the helicopter. And so what we did was we did a little half-minute flight where the rover flew up about 10 feet and hovered for a while. And you may have seen the video that we took of that. We took a series of images with the high-resolution camera from our location or observation location after the use, looking back at the helicopter as it did this. And so we got a high resolution video of the helicopter coming up. And when it took off, it actually made a little cloud of dust that was blown off the ground. And then, of course, we, after 39 seconds, landed back on the ground. So that was the first test. First flight on the surface of another planet. And little known fact about it is that the helicopter carries along with it a little postage stamp size fragment of the fabric from the original Wright flyer. So it's actually the first flight of a piece of the original aircraft that was the original powered first flight here on the Earth, actually is flown again, this time on another planet on the surface of Mars with Ingenuity. And just sort of finish up some of the scenery that we've been seeing around us. Of course, we're in this place where there's these beautiful settlements, and they're making these mesa-like features. Here's one out to the west that we may drive to on our way to our primary location over there on the Delta front. And you can see all sorts of interesting geologic details going on here that tell us something about the conditions of the water flowing. There's up here, there's beautiful layers that are capping, oops, accidentally backwards for some reason. Layers that have truncated these nice sloping layers here. And these sloping layers are the sorts of things to expect at the front of a delta. And now the delta may have been eroded back, and so we're just seeing little pieces of it out here in the plains. So this is very similar to the sort of scenery that you see here in the Southwest, for instance, here in Albuquerque. We have sediments just to our west over in the Rio Puerto Valley, which are essentially the same sorts of sediments deposited by rivers coming down from a sea in the Cretaceous in this case, and depositing really fine grained sediments, and then the river kind of starts forming a beach where it enters the water, so you start getting these coarser near shore sediments or sands that cap it all, so you end up with these beautiful mesas. A very similar setting, and of course this is very interesting geologically. So let's see. So that's basically just a short recap of what we've been doing, where we're going, and in the future we're going to be driving a lot